I find this to be a very interesting chapter in the Glicken text, and I'm rather surprised but happy also to see that he spends some time talking about spirituality in a basic social work text. This is something that I would expect to be covered in a more advanced or more specific kind of course. But nonetheless, since it's here, I thought I'd like to spend some time talking about this before the class is completed, and uh, just dwell a little bit on some of the themes that this chapter brings up. As a member of the majority white Caucasian Judeo-Christian population in the United States, it probably has not been, with the exception of some segments of that particular population, the notion of religion impacting our lives and actually making real changes in the way that things occur, in this day and age, are sort of frowned upon, I think, the belief in those kinds of things. Although, again, I will say that there are many people who very fervently believe in this as well, and so this kind of becomes a controversial topic, more or less, and he'll touch on this a little bit later in this particular lecture. We'll touch on that just a little bit, but this is worth considering. Now, one of the reasons that there is some debate about the impact of spirituality and religious involvement is because when we talk about religion, I think we tend to believe that we're really saying, do you go to church or not? And there's a whole wide range of ways to consider spirituality and religious involvement. In the first few slides in this chapter, Glicken and I will talk a little bit about some of those differences. So there are common elements in definitions, but different ways of viewing our involvement with religion. For instance, religious and spiritual preference or affiliation. This is, do you belong to a specific religious group or a particular spiritual group? Do you actually belong to this group? That's sort of what a lot of people think we're talking about when we bring this topic up, but this is only one part of it. Then there is religious and spiritual history. What was your upbringing? Were you raised in a church or in a particular kind of faith, or were you expected to go, or did your parents not take you to anything related to organized religion? How long did you participate in those things? How deeply were you involved in those activities? And that's where participation comes in. How much participation in those groups or activities did you participate in? What practices do you, as an individual, engage in, maybe separate and apart from the formal practice of the religion, or private practices of religion? For instance, prayer, meditation, contemplation, those kinds of things. What kind of tangible and intangible forms of social support is offered to you by your religious group or a spiritual group in your neighborhood, even maybe one that you don't belong to? When you need to find extra support in times of crisis, in times of confusion, in times of worry, do you turn to religious or spiritual practices then in order to cope with these stressful experiences? Do you have specific beliefs and values that relate to religions and spiritual beliefs and things? Again, not necessarily associated with a formal religion or an organized religion where you get together every Sunday, but nonetheless you may have beliefs and values that associate with religion or a larger religious group, Christianity, Judaism, the Muslim faith, whatever it might be. And this is one area where I say oftentimes when I talk about church, whether you go to church or not, generally speaking, all of us are impacted by the religions around us, I believe, because of this. It is sometimes the beliefs that we have, that we even see as Americans, for instance, are based in Judeo-Christian values a lot of times. What kind of commitment, how important is your religion and spirituality regarding other areas of your life, and how do that commitment to those values really impact your own personal values and behaviors in day-to-day living? Do you have use a spiritual motivation for regulating and reconciling relationships? In other words, forgiving others for those kinds of things, that maybe things that they've done that have hurt you, or feeling as though you need to make up to others for things that you've done, those kinds of things. And finally, religious and spiritual experiences. Have you had any kind of personal experiences with divine or sacred emotional kinds of events and things that have occurred to you that have impacted you and your life in one way or another? So there's a whole range of different kinds of things that when we talk about spirituality and religious involvement that we should take into consideration. And something that I really failed to mention earlier, but particularly in our work with Alaskan Native and Native American clients, the spiritual realm is something that is very, very important. More specifically, perhaps even in their religion, that in some of the more mainstream kinds of religions we have in American life, but also in terms of treating individuals from Alaska Native tribes and populations, because once again, even though they may not be active participants in religious ceremonies related to Native values, nonetheless, through the generations, the beliefs in different spiritual existences and how they interact with us in this world and with the animals and with the environment and all those types of things really are part of the fabric of individuals who've grown up in Alaska Native cultures. And so addressing spirituality in our non-sectarian kind of way of providing social work and in our separation of church and state sort of mentality that we have in the United States, oftentimes our work with individuals does not look at their spiritual existence, and particularly with Alaska Natives and Native Americans, this may be very vital to successful work, and certainly to other populations as well. Now, here's a number of slides related to how spirituality and religious involvement impacts daily life. And these are based on a number of different studies, and this is not something that I've just now come across in a Glicken text, but it's something that over the years I have heard about and read about very consistently. And so, once again, in our non-sectarian kind of way of thinking and approaching the world, some individuals will pretty quickly reject the kinds of things that you hear in these next several slides, and yet others know that these things are really very, very true. And so this is worth just listening to and considering as you think about this topic. One study said that religious involvement reduced the likelihood of disease and disability in 78% of the studies that they reviewed. So this is sort of a meta-analysis of a number of different studies where they found that in over 3/4 of the studies that they reviewed, religious involvement reduced the likelihood of disease and disability. Now that's a pretty remarkable statement. Religion had a particularly positive impact on preventing or limiting coronary disease, heart attacks, emphysema, cirrhosis, other varieties of liver disease. And the strongest predictor of the prevention of illness onset is attendance at religious services. It was fairly clear from George's study that the religious involvement in religion has a positive impact on physical and mental health. Does this again mean that you have to be church going to do this in this particular study? No. Again, we're talking about religious involvement and all the many different forms that we had just touched on. Another study looked at the level of religious interest of psychiatric patients, and we're really looking to see whether any kind of religious commitment had an impact on outcome variables that they were looking at. And they used the Beck Depression Survey, and the Beck Depression Survey has been one of the most widely accepted measures of depression. It's something that is very commonly used and has been used for a long time. And so the patients with a Beck Depression score at a certain high level or higher were included for this study. And what they found was, first of all, again, that these are people who actually go to church. So worship attendees had fewer symptoms of depression. Their hospital stays were shorter. They were happier with their lives. They had lower rates of use of alcohol when compared to participants with less frequent or non-existing worship attendance. And so it appears from this study, with these patients who were suffering from a fairly severe depression, that religious involvement helped them a great deal. The study suggested that attending worship services and things like that might protect against greater severity of symptoms and longer hospital stays, increasing satisfaction with life, and on and on and on, and generally enhancing the quality of life among these psychiatric patients. Another study reported that people who had a strong faith, whatever their religious persuasion might be, have longer lives and really cope better with everything, have less anxiety, and can manage stressful life much more successfully. Lower blood pressure, stronger immune systems. Now, in a sense, this kind of is logical to me, and for those of you who have taken Introduction to Sociology, for instance, when there's always a chapter in every sociology class where you look at the role of religion in our lives, and one of the functions of religion in our culture and in our society is to provide comfort and solace in times of need, and to have give you resources for someone to reach out to, in times of stress and things. So it certainly makes sense that the support of that collection of individuals, or that system of beliefs, or both, would help an individual cope with life's pressures better. Reduces the onset of illness. Then, if illness does affect, recovery is faster. And so again, further other kinds of things that show you that this includes not only mental illnesses and physical illnesses, but also substance abuse and dependence and depression as well. And so there's a lot of indications here that religious involvement, sometimes participation in worship services even, can have a very positive effect upon one's life. Moving beyond, let's say, the spiritual nature, of the implications of those studies, let's look at some practical reasons why this might also, that religions might also have an impact on you. For one thing, it's not even so much in what religion does for you. Sometimes it's maybe what your religion tells you not to do. There are a lot of prohibitions about behaviors that involve risk-taking behaviors that can be harmful for you. Use of tobacco and alcohol, and some religions deny the permission to do that. Some religions have prohibitions against premarital sex or promiscuous sex. Some religions also, restrict the kinds of foods that are harmful to your body and things like this. Some religions experience very good health practices, and so those individuals may actually live longer, partly because of that, because their faith says, it's kind of woven into the faith that you don't do things that hurt you, you don't eat things that hurt you, you eat things that are good for you. Now, this particular study that they're talking about says that these prohibitions on health-related behaviors explain only 10% of the reasons that religious and spiritual beliefs have a positive impact on physical and mental health. I'm not sure where they come up with these figures, but the next couple of slides will tell you that this is only a small part of the reasons why it has an impact on your health, according to these particular studies. I might also add that, and again, being raised in the Roman Catholic Church myself, religions, my religion, for instance, prohibits, prohibits abortions, which is one thing, but the other thing that you may or may not know is that it also prohibits the use of contraceptives. That means condoms. That means birth control pills and things like that. And so one might also say, particularly with the prohibition of the use of condoms, that among those sexually active Roman Catholics, let's say, who may be promiscuous, violating other rules, that particular rule may be harmful to their health too. So it's also possible that the rules can in some respects be harmful to one's health as well. But by and large, it weighs towards the positive, not the negative. Religions provides social support very strongly to its members. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes to non-members as well. That connection with other people is one thing. Just having somebody you're connected with on an intimate level, and sharing a faith, sharing a certain spiritual belief, does have a certain intimacy to it, a certain connection that you might not have with other people in your lives. You develop friendships from this. You may join organizations and groups that are charitable and giving, and being involved in helping others. Generally is pretty well documented that it helps you as well. It can help you as well, certainly. Youth being involved in youth groups and more positively oriented kinds of activities in those groups sometimes can also be of strong support for kids, so as well as adults. And so people who are regularly attending religious services tend to have much larger social networks and have more contact with those networks, so they're much less isolated from others, and so are more likely to be able to receive support and assistance from others when needed. Again, this says this only counts for 5 to 10% of the explanation of the relationship between religion and health. Somewhat bigger, it's seen 20 to 30% of the client's physical and mental health is impacted by this. Third explanation for the health benefits is that people who are religious understand the role in the universe. You really kind of get to connection of how you fit and how our life fits into the bigger picture of things. What's the purpose of our life? Sometimes we do, at one time or another, I think all of us kind of stop and consider, what are we here on earth for? And one's religious faith a lot of times helps to connect that into that the bigger meaning of the universe, let's say, and can give individuals the strength necessary, the fortitude, perseverance, whatever it is, to endure a lot of suffering. And this is referred to as the coherence hypothesis, that the sense that there's a connection, that the meaning of life and your role in the universe kind of all impacts and is all connected together. So it generally helps people to deal with stress. Now, one I guess discussion or debate in the field, however you want to put this, would be, how should this tie into our work in social work? For one thing, as I mentioned earlier, for many clients, their religion, their spirituality is very key to understanding them and to understanding their perception of the world and how they view the world. And so as social workers, when we're working with people, if we ignore that particular section, that particular part of an individual and or their lives, his life, her life, we may be failing to really connect and reach to the parts that are most meaningful for that person. And so this is something that's very important to keep in mind. I think when we read about the elderly a few weeks back too, we also talked about the fact that religion and spirituality tends to get a greater emphasis as individuals age, and there are different reasons for that, some of which may be connected to pondering the fact that one's life, physical life, is nearing its completion, however many years it might be before that gets there. It could be a certain wisdom that comes with living. It could be an opportunity to kind of slow down and really ponder and think and put life together, based upon all that wisdom that has been accumulated. There's any number of different reasons, but that's one thing I think certainly with older persons to keep in mind as well. But it isn't just the elderly. As I mentioned, particular cultural groups have a much stronger association with their religion than others, and many individuals really see this as central and key to their life. And so to ignore that, to not address that, seems to be something that, in a sense, dooms some of our work. But there are those who believe that really we have no business there any more than we would have business in trying to influence our clients' politics, let's say, or something like this. You know, they always say religion and politics are two things you don't talk about in a social setting. Well, you know, social workers, well, for one thing, you've probably noticed in my class that we talk about politics all the time, and now we're talking about religion too. And social workers have to deal with these things, certainly among themselves, but I think also perhaps with our clients. And so my thought is that yes, there is a place for this. Depending upon where you work, though, it may or may not be okay to do that. And this is something that I think you need to think through for yourself as you go about looking for work. Is how important is this, or how difficult would it be for you to deal with this, or to not bring up the issue, depending upon where you work. If there is some sort of the people that are opposed to, for instance, a class on spirituality, which is something that a lot of, so I think actually UAA has had some courses like that. Again, largely connected to the fact that we have individuals from very traditional cultures in this state, much more than many other states. We have to be more aware of this. The course on spirituality, there's concerns that it can conflict with the mission of social work. Not sure what that would be. Issues about stemming from the church and state. Well, again, this isn't religious practice, it's education about spirituality, which is very different kinds of things. Would it conflict with one's personal values? Perhaps. So maybe it's not a requirement, maybe it should be anyway. But this is some of the debate. But almost 3/4 of social workers were surveyed in one study said that that they thought it was very appropriate to discuss religion and spirituality in practice. And if you have an opportunity to take a course in that, I strongly encourage you to do that. There are a lot of social service agencies that are directly sponsored by religious organizations, and that provide social services to clients. And we're going to look at a couple of these, like the Catholic Charities and Jewish Children and Family Services, Lutheran Social Services, and services by the LDS Church as well. There's a wide range of services offered by these organizations, including things, well, as you can see here, like case management for elderly, social emotional problems, emergency food and shelter, emergency assistance, that type of thing. Some have a direct social service functions and occasionally hire social workers to provide services. Others find services are provided by the religious faculty, or the clerical staff, the priests, the ministers, rabbis, offering direct services or concrete assistance to people. Sometimes there are businesses in town that are connected to religious services or religious organizations. For instance, in the Kenai Soldotna area, I believe actually how this all developed was several of the ministers and church leaders in the community got together because there was some concern about individuals going from one church to the next gathering money, and they weren't communicating with each other, and so there were people who were taking advantage of that. And so, if I understand things correctly, this organization called Love Inc., love being love in the name of Christ, Love Inc., was formed in the Kenai Soldotna area as a sort of a clearinghouse, so to speak, and there are professionals and paraprofessionals that work for Love Inc. It's become a charitable organization in the community that takes care of a lot of basic needs for individuals. And I think many of the church leaders in the community now refer individuals that come to their door looking for assistance to Love Inc. for that assistance. And there are clothing outlets and used items, for sale and things like this in different businesses, like the Salvation Army stores, Bishop's Attic. We have a facility called Bishop's Attic in Soldotna, those kinds of things. Here are some mission statements from a few religiously sponsored service agencies and you'll see that while the variety of services that each offers here is pretty wide ranging, the mission statement also oftentimes connects to their specific faith. And so, for instance, Catholic Charities, part of their mission statement is to carry out the vision and mission of the Roman Catholic Church. but the kinds of services that they provide are very wide-ranging, and are not limited to Catholics. Jewish family service is not limited to people who are a member of the Jewish faith either. Salvation Army's mission statement is clearly connected to preaching the gospel of Christ, and there is an evangelical part to this mission where they intend to preach and encourage individuals getting their charities to come to their services and those kinds of things. So, and of course, Salvation Army services are available all around the world, and the bell ringers at Christmas time, everybody's familiar with them. And Salvation Army does some very, very good work with some very, very, very needy individuals all around the world. So, this is the slide for the opposing views, and these are the individuals who have more secular view on things, and they would say that that not all research really has been positive or finds this relationship between positive health and religious involvement, and it's true. Not all research does. The proportion of people who say they never attend religious services has increased over the last 20 or 30 years. There's now about 1 out of 3 people who said they have never gone to a religious service of any type. Sociology indicates that many more Americans are telling pollsters now that they attend church regularly, but when you really go and you watch, not as many people are actually going, and so there's this belief that the idea about church going really is that many people are saying they go when they really don't, for whatever reason, maybe because it seems more socially acceptable to say this. And so there's some question about the validity of the research that we talked about earlier in this particular lecture, and whether we can really count on the individual's own reports of church attendance and involvement in spiritual organizations and belief systems. So what these folks would tell you is, don't necessarily swallow all this and believe it. I would say that about every piece of research. Certainly, always question where the statistics come from, where this information comes from, and if it's something that you really are keenly interested in, something that you really need to know or you really want to know more about, get behind the research and really look at the studies and see how they gathered it and determine, was it appropriate research? Was it valid and reliable? Were the questions appropriate, or were they jaded and those kinds of things, so that shaded in a certain way that individuals are going to be more likely to say yes than no. All those kinds of things you learn from your research courses, or you will learn. There's a reason why you learn those things, and that is because you really should get behind these studies and understand how it is that this information is generated, and question the information. Now, and the final slide in this particular particular lecture is kind of ending negatively, and I don't particularly want to do it that way, but that's kind of the way the chapter is organized, and I'm just kind of following along with the chapter here. But the question of religion and politics, and religious groups and politics, and should religions be involved in politics, given that our Constitution specifies a separation of church and state, and I heard somebody once say that the notion of the separation of church and state really originated, I believe, not to protect religion from government, but to protect government from religion. That was the whole notion, I think, so that I think I'm saying that right. Basically, so that no one state religion kind of takes over and dictates everything, And so anyway, the whole idea that religion is contributing to government seems to violate that notion that the two should be separated. Contributes to politics, I should say. Seems to violate the notion that the two should be separated, but. Nonetheless, religions are very strongly involved in some campaigns. The abortion campaign, it's mentioned here, for instance, that this says 2008, by the way, this should be a 2004 campaign, when John Kerry was running for president against George Bush, when George Bush Jr. was reelected. Kerry was Catholic, but had also adopted the Democratic Party policy, which was a pro-choice position on abortion. The idea being that individuals should be able to make their own choice about abortion, and that really runs counter to the Roman Catholic teachings. And so some of the bishops, and particularly in the Midwest, I believe, had told their priests that if Carrie attends their church, to deny him communion because of this stance, which was considered to be very sinful. And there's also mention here of the LDS Church, and I want to say it's not just the LDS Church, but there's an example in 2008 of a California campaign against same-sex marriage and the kinds of things that the Mormons did in terms of encouraging members to reach out and to engage in a political campaign to oppose same-sex marriage in California. And certainly there have been other religions that do the same thing. And so certainly there's a good deal of involvement of religious groups in the political landscape of the land, and whether that's a good thing or not, I suppose, depends on what your particular perspective is on that topic. And so that winds up the discussion of this particular chapter. I think it's an interesting chapter, and it's something really to give some thought to, and particularly early on, the earlier slides in this segment, where it talks about the impact that belief systems and participation in religion can have on clients' lives and on our own lives, is something really that we need to keep in mind. It can be very, very significant as we work with people in the years ahead. So that will do it for this chapter, and take a break and come on back and listen to the rest. Bye.